I'm going to teach you a poetry Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. Dover Beach written by Matthew Arnold. So Matthew Arnold was lived in between 1820 to 1888, a poet, critic, and man of letters. So he's the third of the great Victorian poet after Tennyson and Browning. His practical output is not great. Sorab and Rustum. Dover Beach, the scholar Gypsy, Thyrsis Rugby Chapel are among his well-known poems. He was disillusioned with life. He lived at a time when Darwinism had struck at the very root of Christianity. The consequent loss of faith in God and become the prevailing note of his poetry. In fact, it inspired some of his best lyrics. He was too serious, too melancholic, and too much of a preacher. He considered poetry to be a criticism of life. Naturally, his poetry is marked by high seriousness. Dover Beach was probably composed in 1851, although it was published only in 1865. In the volume entitled New Poems, the poem reveals Arnold's sensitive scholarly temper and brooding melancholy at the contemplation of life. The title does not suggest the contents of the poem. The poem is not so much on Dover Beach. Dover Beach is a pretext for the poet to reflect on the predicament of man when he suffered no loss of faith. The poem in four stanzas of unequal length is a good example of the poet's definition of poetry as a criticism of life. So, Matthew Arnold is a great Victorian poet, born at Lalcham on the Thames on December 24, 1822. He was the eldest son of Thomas Arnold, the famous headmaster of Rugby School. He was educated in 1849. Matthew Arnold, under the pseudonym, published a collection of short lyric poems called The Strayed Reveller. Arnold was well versed in using monologues in his poetry. In 1853, Arnold published a collection called Simply Poems, which includes poems from the two earlier collections, notably Sorab and Rustum, a romantic epic, and the scholar Gypsy. He was professor of poetry at Oxford from 1857 to 1867. He was deeply inspired by Greek literature. His influence in their perfection or theme justification. Arnold, a critic of repute, is famous for his critical essays. In 1869, he published a book on politics and sociology, namely Culture and Anarchy, which is a masterpiece of ridicule as well as a searching analysis of Victorian society. He criticizes 19th century English politicians for their lack of purpose and excessive concern with the machinery of society. In a later essay, The Study of Poetry, he argued that it's an age of crumbling creeds. Poetry would replace religion, and that therefore readers would have to understand how to distinguish the best poetry from the inferior. Matthew Arnold is a unique writer whose reputation rests equally upon his prose and poetry. By many of the values, attitude, and feelings are expressed in his poem. He lived at a time when in England and all over Europe there was a disillusionment with religion, a decreasing of faith, and all loss of values. Science was underestimating belief in God, and a growing skepticism has left the people adrift. The poem Dover Beach reflects Arnold's fear, sorrow, and confusion at this erosion of faith and values. So it is about a brief introduction about the author Matthew Arnold. Now I am going to read the poem Dover Beach. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair. Upon the straits on the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon blanched land. Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles with the waves draw back and fling. At the return of the ice strand, begin and ease, cease, and then again begin with tremulous cadence, slow and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. You find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full and round earth's shore, lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and the naked shingles of the world. Oh, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, as really neither joy nor love nor light nor certitude nor peace nor help or pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Clash by night. So Dover Beach is a seaport town on the English coast, facing the French coast not many miles away. There has always been a regular ferry service between Dover and Calais on the French coast. Dover is famous also for its white cliffs overhanging the sea. So, in this poem, Dover Beach, the poet observing Dover Beach on a moonlight night with a companion, presumably his wife. The poet says the sea is calm that night. It is flood tide. The light of the moon falls beautifully on the Straits of Dover. So on the French coast, the light shines momentarily and is gone. The white cliffs of Dover, overhanging the calm bay, glimmer in the moonlight. The poet asks his companion to join him at the window and enjoy the pleasing night air. The only sound to break the silence comes from the beach, where the long line of the foam of the waves meets the land pale under the light of the moon. From there comes the hoarse roar of pebbles drawn away from the shore by the waves, and on their return, flung high up the same shore, the sound begins, stops, resumes with a slow, quivering, measured movement, and strikes an eternal note of sadness. Sophocles, the Greek tragic dramatist, heard the same sound long time ago on the Aegean Sea, and it reminded him of the disturbed coming and going of human misery. The poet feels that he and others who live by the northern sea, far away from the Aegean. So, hearing the sound made by the sea, think the same thought. The poet thinks that faith was once like the sea in full flood, inspiring all in the world. It went round the world just as the sea encompassed earth's shore, and rested like the folds held in the clasp of a bright girdle. But now that faith had withdrawn from mankind, leaving all in doubt and despair, it reminded the poet of the waves withdrawing with a melancholy sound in the night wind, so leaving the shore and the pebbles naked and bare. The poet, in such a situation of universal loss of faith, tells his love, that means his wife, that the only thing they can do is to be true and faithful to one another. The world in which they live appears to be unreal, like a land of dreams, so full of variety, beauty, newness, but actually having nothing of joy or love or knowledge or certainly or peace. And so all of them are like battling soldiers on a dark plain, with the entire place thick with confused alarm of fight and flight as the armies battle in the darkness, hopelessly ignorant of whom they are fighting and why they are fighting, why they are fighting. So in this lines begin and cease, and then again with the tremulous cadence flow and bring the eternal note of sadness. So in these lines, the poem opens with a sedate picture of the moon bathed Dover beach. The sea is calm, the tide is full, the moon shines brightly. The sight is so grand that the poet invites his wife to enjoy the spectacle. Matthew Arnold sees the long line of spray caused by the sea dashing against the shore. The grand sight is contrasted with the waves engaged in a fruitless activity of dashing against the shore only to retreat. They draw the pebbles unto them when they retreat, but the pebbles are flung back on the shore by the next wave. The waves are engaged in a barren activity. They seem to be conscious of it, so the sound of the waves sounds harsh and grating to the poet. The ebb and the flow reminds the poet of the ups and downs of man's life. It brings an eternal note of sadness to the poet. In next lines, Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery and flow of human misery. So the poet in these lines opens the poem with an account of the beauty of Dover Beach. The grand sight is contrasted with the ruthless exercise of the waves. They seem to grunt and grate because they dash against the shore only to retreat. They draw the pebbles from the shore only to fling them back. The ebb and flow of the sea bring an eternal sadness in the poet. The poet imagines that Sophocles, the great Greek dramatist, must have heard the grating of the Aegean Sea. It should have inspired him to write on the never ending misery of human existence. It should have inspired him to write on the never ending misery of human existence. Sophocles appeared at the time when the Greek world had begun to lose its faith in gods and goddesses of the Greek legends. They had not found any suitable substitute in which they could repose their faith. So the age of Sophocles, like the age of the poet, was a victim of false faith and divided aims. In the next lines, of the night wind down the vast edges there and naked shingles of the world. So Arnold begins the poem with an account of the beauty of the sea. On that moon drenched night, the tide is full. The full tide of the sea is symbolic of the sea of faith, which once spread over the world in a calm and dignified manner. The poet is referring to the Middle Ages where men had absolute faith in God, where men has absolute faith in God. Then the world was wearing the sea like a garment. Now the sea of faith has retreated far away. The shingles on the shore are left naked and exposed. The poet mounts the decline of his country because of lack of faith. Arnold had been taught in his home a simple and devout faith in religion. Arnold had been taught in his home a simple and devout faith in religion. At college, he was thrown into a world of doubt and questioning, though his heart was yearning to accept the faith of his ancestors. His head was demanding proof and scientific exactness. It was this inward struggle of the poet that finds expression in these lines. The next lines, oh love, let us be true to one another. Oh love, let us be true to one another. So, though the dominating note of Arnold poetry is melancholy, is not totally without hope. It describes nature as fair, various, and new. It looks like a land of dreams, but it is only the outside appearance. Men are so lost in their materialism and carried away by their scientism that they can have no peace, no love, and no light. There is misery, strife, and suffering all around. The only hope for humanity lies in the solidity of true love of individuals. Arnold appeals to his wife to love him truly, promising to reciprocate the same. Reciprocate the same. In the next lines, swept with confused alarms of struggle and fright, where ignorant armies clashed by night. Clashed by night. So in these concluding lines, Matthew Arnold makes a depressing comparison of man's lot in this planet to the condition of soldiers in a camp, surprised by the cries of the enemies at night. In their panic and in the confusion of darkness, they attack their own men or resort to flight. The chief idea is the ignorance of men. The poet may be comparing the conflict between religion and science to the battle of ignorant enemies at night. The clash referred to is the night battle of Epipole between the Spartans and Athenians, referred to by the Thucydides. So the evaluation thought in Arnold's Dover Beach is Arnold's open Dover Beach on a deceptively calm note. It's a description of Dover Beach on a moonlight night. It's a calm and beautiful night. The moon is bright and the waves are flowing in their fullness. The sight is so enchanting that the poet invites his wife to join him to enjoy the spectacle. The poet singles out for description the noise of the sea flowing and ebbing. The waves seem to be making a harsh, grating sound. The reason is that they are engaged in a barren activity. The waves lash against the shore and drag with them the pebbles on the shore. The pebbles are brought back and plugged into the shore by the next wave. In contrast with the full tide that is grand and profound. That is grand and profound. The waves are seen engaged in a fruitless exercise. The slow, tremulous cadence of the sea carries to the poet's mind a message of melancholy, an eternal note of sadness. An eternal note of sadness. The vain dashing of the waves against the shore has through ages suggested a note of sadness to reflective minds and sensitive spirits. The undulations of the sea are an allegoric representation of the ups and downs of human life. The allegoric representation, the undulations of the sea are an allegoric representation of the ups and downs of human life. Sophocles must have been inspired by the grating sound of the Aegean Sea to reflect in his plays on the never ending waves of human misery. The grating sound of the waves beating on Dover beach brings to Arnold's mind the turbid ebb and flow of human existence. Flow of human existence. Arnold attributes human misery to the loss of faith of man in God and religion. The ancient Greeks lost faith in their mythological gods. The moderns have also lost faith because of the scientism and materialism. However, during the Middle Ages of man had total and implicit faith in the Roman Church. Implicit faith in the Roman Church, and then also it's inspired by the grating sound of the Aegean to reflect the place on never-ending waves of human misery. The grating sound of the waves beating on Dover Beach brings to Arnold's mind the turbid ebb and flow of human existence. Arnold attributes human misery to the loss of faith of man in God and religion. The ancient Greeks lost faith in their mythological gods. The moderns have also lost faith because of scientism and materialism. However, during the Middle Ages, man had total and implicit faith in the Roman Church. This enabled him to live happily with spiritual certitude in their outlook. This idea is conveyed by the poet in terms of a full flowing sea, the sea of faith, the waters of which were always touching the shore without ebbing away and leaving the shore dry. The round earth was wearing the sea of faith as a moment, as a garment. But the condition of Arnold's time is disquieting. Many have grown strong in intellect and in the scientific and reasoning faculties. Man has lost faith in God. The sea of faith has receded far away from the shores of England. The shingles on the shore have been left dry and naked with the faith deserting him. Man finds himself emptied of peace and calm. Of peace and calm. The face of nature is beautiful. The land looks various, beautiful, new and resembles a land of dreams. But for men, there is no love, no joy, no light, no peace, and no help. They have reduced their world to a darkling plain. Crazy are their activities. They strive in vain, and they know not what they strive for. Though the life of modern man is devoted of meaning and purpose, the poet does not give way to total despair. The poet addresses his beloved and bids her to be true to him, promising her that he would be true to her in the solidity of individuals' true love. The poet seeks to find solace in a world torn by conflict and strife. The world torn by conflict and strife. So the elegance note of The poem is the prominent characteristic of Arnold's poetry is a form of melancholy, born of a painful awareness of a sensitive individual caught between a dead faith and an uneasy rationalism. Arnold belonged to that group of Victorian poets who were unable to accept the result of either religion or of science as complexity, completely true or satisfying. He wanted to have faith in some religion or other without at the same time surrendering his national or radiological faculties. He found himself wandering between two worlds, the dead and the other struggling to the born. One who is struggling, wandering, surrendering his natural, rational, logical faculties. He found himself wandering between two worlds, one dead and other is born. He gave himself up to melancholy and dissolution. He led a grave, thoughtful, contemplative life. He found in the elegy the outlet of his native melancholy, of the Virginian tribe over the mournfulness of moral destiny. The seemingly negative or pessimistic note that Arnold strikes in Dover Beach is nothing but an expression of the time spirit. In a very skillful manner, the poet paints a background of a calm sea from nature to serve as a foil or contrast to his unquiet thoughts and anxieties. The poet employs effectively the symbol of the sea. The poet is thrilled by the sight of the serene, beautiful, moon drenched Dover beach. The grand sight is contrasted with the fruitless exercise of the waves. The clue to the poem is furnished by two phrases, the sea of faith and the ebb and flow of it. The ebb and flow are alternating perpetually. It has been going on from time immemorial. It will go on forever. Sometimes the sea rises and the waves come up with greater force and flood the land. Similarly, the sea of faith flooded the land during the Middle Ages. The Roman Church enjoyed such a sway over man that the people suffered from no loss of faith. Earlier, the ancient also suffered from a loss of faith in their mythological gods. When there is a flow, it is but natural that it should be followed by an ebb. What comes up must go back after the formy days of Christianity in the Middle Ages. The sea of faith has slowly ebbed. The whole of Europe has become distracted and weakened by the loss of faith. The retreat of the sea of faith has left the shingles naked. The negative skepticism of man has left him high and dry, exposed and vulnerable. He finds himself in a darkling plain where he can find neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help or pain. The sea is groaning, tired of its barren activity of reaching the shore only to get back by drawing the pebbles with them only to fling them back. The sea reminds the poet of the ups and downs of life. The sea reminds the poet of the ups and downs of life. Arnold's outlook on life is not without hope. Arnold's outlook on life is not without hope. He is able to appreciate the beauty of nature. He finds the world various, beautiful, and new. It looks like a land of dreams that man has made a mess of life is an entirely different matter. The wild spiritual confusion caused by the loss of faith, negatives, the beauty of nature, in a community torn by strife and suffering, the solace for man lies in the true love of individuals. The uneasy mind of the poet seeks the comfort and warmth of love of his wife. It is in the warmth of personal relationship that man has to find refuge. Man has to find refuge. So, so in this way, the most prominent characteristics of Arnold's poetry is a form of melancholy born of a painful awareness of a sensitive individual caught between a dead faith and an uneasy rationalism. Arnold belonged to the group of Victorian poets who were unable to accept the results of either religions or of science as completely true to satisfying. He wanted to have faith in some religion or other without at the same time surrendering his rational or logical faculties. He found himself wandering between two worlds, one dead and other is struggling to be born. He gave himself up to melancholy and disillusion. He led a grave, thoughtful, contemplative life. He found in the elegy that outlet of his native melancholy of the Virginian cry over the mournfulness of moral destiny. The seemingly negative or pessimistic note that Arnold strikes in Dover Beach is nothing but an expression of the time spirit. Arnold attributes human misery to the loss of faith of man in God and religion. The ancient Greek lost faith in their mythological gods. The moderns have also lost faith because of scientism and materialism. However, during the Middle Ages, man had total and implicit faith in Roman Church. This enabled him to live happily with spiritual certitude in their outlook. This idea is conveyed by the poet in terms of full flowing sea, the sea of faith, the waters of which were always touching the shore without ebbing away and leaving the shore dry. The round earth was wearing the sea of faith as garment. Faith as garment. When the poem opens, we could see that the poet is at the window of his house near Dover Beach, looking at the moonlight shore. The moon blanched landscape described in the opening lines is composed of details which suggest the serenity, balance, and stability which Arnold desired for him. The sea is calm, full of tides. The air is clear, that a light can be visible on the French coast. The cliffs of Dover are huge and stunning in the bay. The poet calls his love, that is his wife, to come to the window to hear the harsh noise of the stones being thrown up against the shore with the endless movement of the waves. But this sound of sadness introduces the conflict between the sea and the land and symbolically between long held religious beliefs and the challenging challenges against them. The mood of the poet can be measured by the movement of the waves, which makes the poet to go back to the past, to ancient Greece, and experience how melancholic sound was heard from the Aegean Sea by Sophocles, the ancient Greek writer of tragic drama, who had well understood the misery of human beings. The poet says that he was deeply inspired by the waves in the Aegean Sea and the Northern Seas, had given rise to a thought in him. The moonlight, the soft or sweet air, the cliffs of headlands, the high tide, and even the metaphorical girdle are evidently details with the symbolic value for the poet. But the calm stability and poise for which they stand are denied to him. And from this thought, the ruminations begin. Arnold tries to work them in ungraciously by having a moonlight scene to address him. But the moonlight is obviously Arnold talking to him and warning himself of the alternative dangers of the expense of spirits and passion and shriveling the spirit in everyday life in the world. So in this way, Dover Beach is one of the Matthew Arnold's greatest poems, though it is a short lyric. It represents the main movement of mind of the last quarter of a century. It is the one work by Arnold which ought to appear in events, the briefest anthology of great English poems. In the poem Dover Beach, Arnold provides the only solution, that is love. It is fair to conclude that Dover Beach is not love poem, but about measuring of meaning of life. It discusses how love can give measuring in a world which is consumed with hate and darkness. The poem depicts that there is darkness and lack of faith in either God or humanity. That later is of love makes the godless world a better place to live in. It should be noted that there is also the sense of desperation that exists in Arnold's poem. The love interest is the only subject that can restore all that the dark world lacks. In sum, the poem Dover Beach by Arnold presents a world that is rather dreary and even hopeless to the average man. In the midst of the chaos and general lack of faith, the only glimpses of light in such dark words are presented by love. The poem presents the world which is supported by ideas that their lives lack meaning aside from the shallow and wise hidden concerns of everyday, and thus they feel they are living in darkness. The tone of the poem changes when love enters the picture, thus the reader is presented with images of it and voice illuminated by the gleam that only love can provide. So this is the brief introduction of Dover Beach written by Matthew Arnold. In the next class, we are discussing Julius Caesar drama written by William Shakespeare, discussing in remaining two classes from tomorrow. Okay, bye. See you. ಗ್ಯಾಸ್ಟ್ರಿಕ್ ರೋಗ ಕಣೆ ಅದೊಂದು ಮಡಿಕೊಂಡಿನಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಬಳಸಿ ಹಾಲಿ ಹತ್ತು ಹೋಗಿದೆ